Hello everyone. Welcome to AI Images. Today's class borrows a title from Sarah T. Roberts. Your AI is a human. And we're going to talk about some of the ways in which your AI is a human and some of the ways in which it isn't. And I want to be clear that what we're talking about is not the idea that your AI is sentient or that your AI is a living person with a human-like intelligence. As we've seen already, we've kind of unpacked how these machines work. And so I hope that this is evident to you that these things are still a far cry from what we might call sort of sentient Terminator-like, or even Data from Star Trek. These types of characters, that's not what we mean when we say your AI is a human. The title comes from Sarah T. Roberts. This reading is in the reading list, and it refers to the fact that hidden behind the interfaces of so much of the AI tools that we're using is actual human beings doing the work or moving things from one place to another or looking up that information and delivering it to you. So we're going to go through some of that. We're going to talk a little bit about the history of automation and its effects on the workforce, which is very relevant to our discussions about artists and whether artists are being replaced. And we're also going to talk about the AI as an artist in the sense that there are artists in there and what are their rights and what can they do to protect themselves. And there's some interesting technologies and platforms that we're going to talk about. So finally, the third part of that is when your AI is not a human, which is following through on recent advice from the Copyright Office, the US Copyright Office, talking about a kind of early understanding and framework that they have put forward for dealing with the copywritten materials involved in AI art and whether or not what you make with an AI tool can be copyrighted. And spoiler alert, the answer is kind of vague, but we'll unpack a little bit of that going forward. So without further ado, let's hop into the class. And I want to start in 1770. In 1770, civil servant and scientist Wolfgang von Kempelen went to the court of the Hungarian Empress Maria Theresa with a remarkable automaton. The Mechanical Turk, as it was called, was a wooden sculpture of a man, as you see here, standing behind a chessboard. Kempelen opened the doors to show that the cabinet was empty and then set about showing off what this remarkable chess-playing machine could do. Closing the doors, he wound it up with a key, which is a pretty standard way of cranking up a mechanical clockwork system at the time, and then he challenged any audience member to a game of chess. The robot would move pieces around, and quite often it would win. It even played Benjamin Franklin during his trip to Paris, as well as a quite famous chess player at the time. And in fact, the Mechanical Turk went on playing chess for 84 years with seemingly no one able to figure out the precise arrangements of gears and clockworks that gave it such an intelligence. Here you see a reproduction of that machine, built in 2019. You can see that the doors are cleverly designed so that when it opened, it's difficult to see what's inside. But it wasn't a super complex machine. It was actually a magic trick, or a hoax, with a person inside the box with clever compartments where the human arms could control the robot's movements like a puppet and hide the presence of their body when the cabinet doors were opened and the clockworks were revealed to the audience. And most people at the time understood that this was an elaborate trick. It was entertainment. It wasn't necessarily thought of as this scientific breakthrough at the time, but it was certainly a point of conversation to figure out how it was being done. And many people attributed ideas that it was possessed, that it was a brilliantly engineered machine. So people didn't know how it worked. They assumed there was trickery involved. And yet, really, it was presented as a kind of artificial intelligence. Not something that was called artificial intelligence at the time, but was basically presented as an automaton. And in fact, one of the pioneers of complex adding machines, Charles Babbage, saw the machine and set about trying to build a simple version of it. And ultimately, Babbage invented the mechanical calculator, which is one of the earliest of the modern computers. So, in essence, the history of computers is a result of a hoax about a machine that pretended it wasn't a human. Today, artificial intelligence systems often continue to have people hidden behind cabinet doors. Amazon offers a service called Mechanical Turk, and this service is Amazon's modern version without someone hidden in a cabinet, but be hidden behind a user interface. Amazon's Mechanical Turk allows you to pay humans pennies for tiny tasks, and these tasks are often inserted into the data pipeline, disguised as an autonomous system. We're going to watch a video produced by Amazon to highlight what this Mechanical Turk system is and how it's meant to be used. And as we do, remember, first, this is Amazon presenting its own version of the service, so be mindful about what's said here, right? We are watching an ad, so let's watch it with a little bit of critique in mind. Let's be careful about the claims. But also, as you look at the jobs they describe, think about how they mirror the structures of artificial intelligence that we've talked about. Particularly, think about the types of tasks that they are talking about and how these map to some of the artificial intelligence systems we've talked about. Sometimes Mechanical Turk is referred to as artificial intelligence. So see if you could see why and how that would work.
We've all been there. Piles of data that needs to be reviewed and means you'll be spending hours, days, or weeks on a repetitive task. Endless spreadsheets, folders jammed with images, or a long list of sales leads. Worse is when that pile is simply overwhelming. What to do? Pull more members of the team into it? That's neither scalable nor a good use of your team's time. Instead of spending hours of your team's time, it's time to take a look at Amazon Mechanical Turk. Mechanical Turk is a crowdsourcing service provided by Amazon that connects you with thousands of people who are excited to help you with your project. MTurk workers are people just like you in the US and around the world who are happy to earn a little extra money contributing to your project. Mechanical Turk workers excel at doing all of the tasks that people are good at, such as categorizing businesses, images, and data, transcribing images, audio, and video, comparing items and data records, evaluating items for quality or cleaning up issues, collecting data from various places on the internet, and a wide range of other tasks. Instead of dividing all that work amongst a few overworked members of your team and letting them spend the next 3 weeks working through it, you can make it available to thousands of workers in the crowd. Each worker will do 1, 2, or more of your tasks. By dividing them up amongst so many workers, your work will get done much more quickly, in many cases in a matter of hours. Each of your tasks is presented to workers as a form that they can complete on the web. In most cases, you provide workers with enough information to complete the task and fields where they can provide the information that you need. To improve accuracy, MTurk also makes it easy to route each task to multiple workers. Because even the most diligent worker can sometimes make a simple mistake, particularly when the right answer is a judgment call, getting multiple responses is a great way to increase the accuracy of your results. In this case, one of our workers accidentally clicked on the wrong category, but because we asked 2 other workers, we know that the right category is cat. The more workers you ask, the higher the accuracy you can expect. You can even use Mechanical Turk as a panel for your survey or study by asking for hundreds of workers to respond to your task. To get results that are accurate, fast, and affordable, we encourage you to give Amazon Mechanical Turk a try.
So the reality of these systems is that they're often used for establishing training data that drives AI. And these workers often experience pretty low wages and virtually no job security. There is also the risk of unclear instructions from their contractors who might not describe their needs or the use case of the overall project in ways that help these micro workers make sense of the things that they're supposed to do. They also can't organize for workers' rights because, as the video explains, they are scattered across the world and they often have very little connection to one another besides the platform. These human workers have built the training data for a wide range of classifications tasks, including labeling images, audio examples, or videos, and on average, they make about $2 an hour. So there's little chance that you have people doing this for a living in places like the United States or Europe. The majority of these workers are based in India, Kenya, and Venezuela. And one of the things these workers might do is impersonate an actual artificial intelligence. A study in 2019 found that 40% of machine learning startups in Europe didn't use machine learning. An example of this was a startup marketing an AI for travel recommendations. And in fact, when you prompted an AI for these travel recommendations, your query was routed to Mechanical Turkers, who would work to find an ideal itinerary for your travel plans, which was then sent back to you as if the AI had done it itself. But there was no AI. This is AI impersonation, what Tubaro jokingly refers to as humans stealing the jobs of computers. Of course, what's actually happening is that AI is an appealing technology. People want to invest in the hot new machine learning startup. And so really paying people pennies to find luxury hotels is not a hot product for investment, whereas an AI that can do it would be. But there are nonetheless people on the other side of these requests. And it's oftentimes that these people are disconnected from the overall project. So for example, you could be a Mechanical Turker and you are not looking at the same job. Remember that ad, they're breaking up these tasks and distributing them to multiple people. So you get a request disconnected from the overall project. 1 minute you might be labeling an image, the next minute you might be looking up travel recommendations. Some of these instructions are going to be arbitrary. They have no idea what they're being asked to do at all. And we've talked in this class about the importance of context, why we should understand, for example, why an image needs to look a certain way, or how we're supposed to verify whether this is a person or not a person, or what kind of category this person should belong to. Without that information about what the overall project is, these things become a little bit more disconnected. And it's hard to create a cohesive whole in the data sets that are built this way. It's very hard to do that when you're relying on people with no idea about what they're actually building. And you can hear testimony of the type of random tasks that are assigned to these workers. One of them says, they tell you, draw a circle around a tomato. We don't know why. I think everyone knows what a tomato is, I hope. Then I think to myself, if it's there, it must be useful to someone for something, but why? I don't know. So this is an actual quote from an actual Mechanical Turk worker talking about the type of stuff that gets assigned to them, the types of jobs they take. Another area that humans are often used for is tasks that we think are automated in content moderation. And we're going to spend, this video is about 12 minutes long. It is a video about content moderation made by Casey Newton from The Verge a few years ago, describing how these jobs are set up and the effect that it has on those workers. And frankly, he's talking here to a pretty high-level employee of a major tech company, getting paid a reasonable salary with reasonable benefits, who is a very lucky and fortunate person to be in this position, because many of the people doing this kind of content moderation work do not have those privileges. And this video acknowledges that this work, nonetheless, however well compensated and well taken care of its employees might be on paper, is actually a pretty awful experience. We're going to hear about the types of content these people see and have to deal with on a daily basis for their jobs. And I want to warn you that this video acknowledges the existence of things like child abuse and other violent crimes that might be difficult to hear about. So if you're not up for that at this particular moment, feel free to skip ahead to the end of that video. It'll be pretty clear if you're skimming. Go ahead and skip ahead about 12 minutes and we'll pick up.
part of the job description was you will be part of a team that protects free speech online, which makes it seem very heroic. Felt like you were putting on a cape, working at Google.
Over the past year, I've been reporting on the lives of Facebook's content moderators in America, and they've told me about their low pay, their dire working conditions, and in some cases, the long-term mental health consequences of doing the work that they do. A content moderator is kind of like a police officer for the internet. If you ever see something that you think doesn't belong on a site and you report it, that report is going to be reviewed by a human being. And while a lot of what they see is really benign, like spam, for example, some of it's really disturbing. I'm talking about murder, terrorism, and child exploitation. Recently, I started seeking out people who did this kind of work for Google and YouTube. I wanted to see how their experiences compared to the ones I'd heard about already. And what I did learn surprised me.
Part of, doing our job and how they would make us kind of feel better about it was that, you guys see this so other people don't have to see this, right?
Over the course of my reporting, I talked to both people who worked at Google full-time and people who had been hired on through third-party contractors. It became clear to me that no matter who hired you, doing this job over a long enough time period can cause significant mental health consequences. But it also became clear to me that there is a big difference in how Google employees get treated and how those third-party contractors get treated. Today, a former full-time Google employee named Daisy Soderberg-Rivkin is going on the record to talk about her experiences as a content moderator. She had access to all the perks and all the benefits that come with being a full-time Google employee. But at the end of the day, that didn't save her from the consequences of doing the job.
I was a legal root removals associate, which is a very fancy way of saying I was a content moderator at Google.
Let's talk about what the job actually was. You show up, you have your orientation, you sit down at your computer, it's time to do your job. What is your job?
So you usually start your work by going through a queue. So you're assigned to a queue based on either an issue area or a geographic area. So I focused on the French market because my first languages were French and English, and I also worked on our child sexual abuse imagery cases and our terrorism cases.
And you were working primarily on web search, right?
Yes. We, as in-house content moderators, we would usually handle more high-level complex issues. So certain things that were very high volume, such as defamation and copyright, were typically sent over to contractors. They would then escalate to us if it was kind of a gray area, and if it was even a gray area for us, we would then escalate to our counsel. So it was kind of levels of how specialized we were.
At what point did you start to feel like you were seeing more disturbing stuff than you expected?
Very early on, they said we would be analyzing child sexual abuse imagery, but I remember very clearly in parentheses it said this kind of content would be limited to 1 to 2 hours per week. When in reality, we were understaffed. So we would be in there sometimes 5-6 hours a week, which is, it sounds like nothing, but it's actually...
Oh, it sounds like a lot.
It's a lot.
Yeah. When did you first notice that doing this job was starting to affect your mental health?
When I was walking around San Francisco, actually, and I was with one of my friends, and we saw a group of kids, the toddlers, that were hanging on to one of those ropes so that they don't go far. I looked at them, and then I kind of blinked once, and suddenly I just had a flash of images of some of the images I had seen. Children being tied up, children being raped at that age. This is 3 years old. I kind of stopped, and I was kind of blinking a lot, and my friend had to make sure I was okay, and I had to sit down for a second, and I just exploded crying. She was like, "What just happened?" And I couldn't explain it to her, and I just these racing thoughts, and then an instant panic attack. I was having nightmares. I wasn't sleeping. I had spent multiple days just crying in the bathroom. And, you know, I was having all of these panic attacks, and my work productivity just dipped. And finally, you know, my manager was like, listen, we really need you to step up your productivity game. And I just snapped, and I turned to him and I said, do you understand what we're looking at? And we're not machines, we're humans. So we have emotions, and those emotions are deeply scarred by looking at children being raped all the time and people getting their heads chopped off. It was like there was no escape. And I finally snapped, and they took that as, oh, she needs to take a second. She needs to breathe. And I said, no, I need to leave. The free food, the nap pods, all these benefits, this doesn't mean anything if this is my day-to-day.
Daisy helped me understand how hard this job is to do, even when you work in the greatest office in the world. But the truth is that most people don't work in an office half that nice. One of Google's biggest projects that it has to moderate, of course, is YouTube. And when it comes to YouTube, Google has decided to give most of the work of content moderation to third-party contractors. Recently, I went to Austin, Texas to meet with a group of moderators who work for Accenture on the YouTube project. Specifically, they work on what is called the VEQ, VE standing for violent extremism. 120 times a day, they review YouTube videos that have terrorism, graphic violence, and other disturbing content. You're about to hear from one of them, and we've altered the audio to protect their identity.
So at the beginning, they told you can watch some videos and you can take some actions to apply YouTube policies. But you don't feel how this is going to impact you.
In some ways, the content moderators who do this work for Google and YouTube are treated better than the ones who work for Facebook. Most prominently, they get 2 hours of break time each day, basically 2 hours of paid leave in which they can recover from the challenges of doing this work. But most of them aren't able to take a full 2 hours a day.
They force me information to have to be sitting on this 5 hours a day. And if you don't, there will be emotions, schedules will be changed, you will be on shift, and this is going to affect my work life. I will not take my 3 hours.
What kind of things do they do that make life hard?
They always have complaints about everyone, you know, like, I have something on you. If you make any problems, you know what? This is the reason that I can't fire you.
Right.
One of the things that they always say is for we miss one agents tomorrow will get processed in.
So they're constantly reminding you how easily you can be replaced.
Yes, but now that's they feel stuck somewhere. They can't leave the work because they have responsibilities. They have bills right now you have to pay.
So it sounds like people feel kind of trapped.
They are. Yeah, that's a good word.
When I brought all of this to Google, the company told me that it takes the health of its workers very seriously and pointed out that it offers on-site counseling to both its full-time employees and to its contractors. I think it's worth pointing out, though, that even though Daisy had access to that on-site counseling, the counselor she had ultimately told her to go seek outside help and get a therapist. Daisy also eventually took medical leave and ultimately got an emotional support animal to help her. It's a dog named Stella.
High five. I found a psychiatrist and I found a therapist. The psychiatrist put me on antidepressants. I was diagnosed with chronic anxiety and PTSD. And then I started seeing a therapist just to talk through these things. And she said, is legal removals associate anything close to a content moderator? And I said, it is a content moderator. And she said, trust me when I say you are not the first person that I've seen with this particular issue.
It seems like recovering from doing this job has itself been a full-time job.
Oh yeah. Whenever someone talks to me about content moderation, I say I'm a recovering content moderator. They're like, oh, you talk about it like it's like alcoholism. And I said, well, you never fully recover.
One of the things that is so interesting to me about your story is that you were one of the very few people I've talked to who did content moderation as a full-time employee of a company rather than a contractor. You had access to 6 months of paid medical leave. A contractor who's like moderating for YouTube in Austin doesn't have that same access.
I had those months to think about my choices and to think about ways out without having to deal with unemployment or having to deal with, how am I going to pay rent? And I know those contractors don't have that opportunity.
The contractors I've talked with in Austin are making $18.50 an hour, about $37,000 a year. Does that seem like a high enough wage given some of the risks involved?
Absolutely not. There's never going to be enough money to make this okay. I'm going to be clear about that. But I think that you need to pay contractors proportional to what they're going through, the impact of their work, because this is so vital to the business.
Let's put a fine point on it. Google can't exist without the work that you did, right? Like you were responding to official legal requests from governments that would have otherwise shut Google down in their country if you didn't respond.
Exactly.
So this is very high stakes work. And yet for some reason, these companies have just chosen not to value it.
Yeah, I think that contractors are so essential, especially considering how much volume we have. We need as many people as we can doing this work, but we also need to change the overall system and the overall structure of how this work is being done, how we support these people, how we give them tools and resources to deal with these things, or else these problems are only going to get worse.
So this makes the case for building AI for these kinds of tasks. It's hard work, it's emotionally draining work, and it might be seemingly ideal to build an artificial intelligence system that doesn't have these emotional responses to the types of content that needs to be filtered. But if you're going to build an AI, you have to train an AI, which means that humans will have to watch and label hours of this types of content in order to tell a machine what types of images or content to remove. And as we saw in the reading, Your AI is a Human, the major social media platforms are incapable of governing their properties with computational AI-based means alone. The very idea that this is a solution for these platforms speaks to something interesting about AI and the nature of power in tech. If companies are looking to automate labor or work, but ultimately just ship it to developing countries working with extremely low wages, there's something strange about that. There's something strange about that logic. It seems to suggest that low-wage workers that you're hiring to do this work aren't human, right? Automation says we're going to make this possible in a way that no human has to deal with it. No human is involved. And then what they're actually doing is having people in other countries that they have to pay very little to do this work, do that work. And so what does that say about being human and who counts as human? Automation infers that no human is doing the work. And so if you call this automation and there are humans doing it, you're basically erasing those humans. So what does that say about one's view of people? This question of technology and politics goes back a long way, and it illustrates a particular quote by Langdon Winner, written in 1980, where he suggested the question that artifacts, which are basically any technology, have political dimensions. He writes, "Artifacts can contain political properties. First are instances in which the invention, design, or arrangement of a specific technical device or system becomes a way of settling an issue in a particular community. Seen in the proper light, examples of this kind are fairly straightforward and easily understood. Second are cases of what can be called inherently political technologies, man-made systems that appear to require or to be strongly compatible with particular kinds of political relationships. By politics, I mean arrangements of power and authority in human associations, as well as the activities that take place within those arrangements. We can think about this quote quite broadly when we think about the politics of artificial intelligence. Remember that Winner's definition of politics is not just about political parties, but about the question of who has power and how they use it, power of any kind. The promise of automating content moderation systems is political in the first sense. It says, okay, we see a problem and we can create a technology that can fix it, right? So there's a political solution. There's a political discussion that is going on in a community, and they are saying technology can resolve this political discussion. But then when you look at what the technology actually is, you realize you're in the second set of cases, in which the power disparity between workers in developing countries and economies and the tech companies of richer countries is fully on display. The only reason these ideas of sending automation work to developing economies is even possible is because of that power disparity. And that's something that is important to think about. When we say that artifacts have politics, what we're basically saying is, A, if you suggest the technology as a resolution for a political conversation, that is a way of saying that this technology has a political dimension. But there's also ways of saying that when we introduce a technology, we are relying on a state of the world that may or may not be ideal for everyone. And so this becomes a question about politics, and the politics of using that technology becomes very important. In general, the automation of anything, from shoe manufacturing to automatically creating illustrations and artworks, is political. There's a familiar understanding, especially in the tech world, that automation might ultimately cost a lot of jobs, but that it creates new opportunities. This is a political position. This is a political argument that says, well, we can lose these jobs, but we're going to make new ones. If you can save money producing shoes by automating the shoemaker, you might be able to hire many more people to ship, package, and design those shoes. That's one of these arguments. And the cost of making shoes will go down, and the former shoemakers will get retrained to do new jobs. This is kind of the prevailing logic of automation. But recently, some MIT economists, Daron Acemoglu and Pascal Restrepo, describe a process called so-so automation, which is useful to consider when we talk about AI and automation and power in general. This idea of the automated shoe factory holds up under certain conditions, but not all. In fact, whenever a job is automated, a variety of things might happen. Sometimes they all happen. And I bring this up because it's so important to this big discussion about AI images, which is, does it put artists out of work? Automation, Acemoglu says, does a few different things. One of them is displacement, the elimination of jobs. Along with that, there can also be a productivity boost, where companies are making stuff cheaper and consumers can buy it cheaper, so companies can make more stuff and customers can buy more stuff, which means that more people can get hired to handle that stuff. And that's called the reinstatement effect. And from 1947 to 1987, they argue that that is what was happening. When businesses automated from 1947 to 1987, it often made new efficiencies in productivity that helped create new products, make new products cheaper, make them more available to more people, and as a result, they could hire more people and there would be more jobs. There's plenty of automation, they write, but this was accompanied by the introduction of new tasks in both manufacturing and the rest of the economy that counterbalanced the adverse labor demand consequences of automation. In other words, we automated tons of stuff, but we also had new work to do as a result of this new stuff. And so in manufacturing and everywhere else, this decrease in labor demand actually led to balance, where we would hire and possibly even expand the workforce as things became more efficient and productive. And so this idea that new technology leads to new jobs took hold here because that had been more or less the case for 40 years.
we are witnessing the next revolution. Its name is automation. Its agent is the machine which can think for man and act for man. The servant that is so versatile and so powerful as to become master.
But then something changed. After 1987, automation created fewer new jobs because more companies started focusing on automation to reduce labor costs. This is the argument of Restrepo and Acemoglu. So-so automation refers to automation technologies that are focused on eliminating labor rather than increasing productivity. An example of this is self-checkout kiosks at supermarkets. They are not more productive. They simply replace a worker, and they're cheaper, but they do not pass those benefits on to customers in ways that allow their groceries to become cheaper. So nobody's getting more groceries, nobody's getting cheaper groceries as a result of this. Basically, the balance between the labor that has been replaced by these machines and the benefits of that automation are negligible. A second example is automated customer service menus, which make it harder to get the information customers actually want. So you dial up a phone, you get a phone tree, there's a robot on the other end. You've spent several hours on the phone trying to get a piece of information that you can't get because the machine can't understand you. This isn't making anything more efficient, but it is replacing a job with a computer. And so this is something to think about is, are these new tools that we're looking at, image automation, we could call it, will it create new opportunities or work for illustrators, photographers, and designers, or will it simply replace them? And this is the nature of the debate today around what the future of these creative industries is. A lot of people will tell you, well, it's going to create a whole bunch of new jobs and new creative streams. And a lot of people will tell you, actually, no, it's just going to make illustrations and photographs cheaper. It's going to make designing things cheaper. And it's not actually going to lead to any kind of new boost in productivity. So this is the type of frame that we might bring to these questions. And right now, we can speculate. We don't know how it's going to play out. Few of us can predict this. But these are some of the questions that I encourage you to think about and ask when you're looking at this debate. So we looked at the first one, but the second one is, could AI image tools increase the productivity of illustrators, photographers, and designers in ways that actually lead them to create something more productively or more efficiently in ways that actually help them with their work, right? That help them make more money, even. Where do the profits of this productivity go? Ultimate question. And second, do these tools allow for innovation that would create new industries? At the moment, these tools are ones that we pay for. We pay OpenAI for DALL-E 2. We pay for Midjourney. We pay for access to Stable Diffusion for the most part. And so these profits that may have been going to multiple designers, illustrators, and photographers now goes to one company, which is a consolidation that is worth asking some questions about. And what does that do to workers? When we've seen so-so automation in the past, we've seen that if workers aren't benefiting, then ultimately you see job losses without any recuperation back into the job market. And when we're talking about this with freelancers and artists, it's an even more complex situation. Because there's also the question of what exactly automation means and whether art follows the economic trajectory of assembly lines. Art is obviously something more personal than a factory or the goods that it produces. In a lot of ways, art is a direct connection between the person who makes it and the profits. So if I make a piece of art, I profit from that work of art. This is something that doesn't happen when we are in a factory or when we are selling goods. And so this is the removal of that type of autonomy one of the last remaining pieces of autonomy, where craft and artwork is created by a person who solely benefits economically from the creation of that work. And so what happens now when an intermediary is introduced that is taking that work and reselling not the work itself in the copyright sense, but the action of art, the action of creating an illustration? Why do these companies profit? And are those profits going to be returned to the broader community of artists who are in that data set, or not, or even just artists who are being replaced by this technology? These are important questions. And I will say we are now in the early days of GPT-4, which launched with a demo at South by Southwest, where I happen to be. And all anyone could talk about was this.
A nice hand-drawn mock-up of a joke website. Definitely worthy of being put up on my refrigerator. So I'm just going to take out my phone, take a photo of this mock-up. And here we go. And now we wait. And so we can actually take now this output. So literally we just said to output the HTML from that picture. And here we go. Actual working JavaScript, filled in the jokes. For comparison, this was the original of our mockup. And so there you go, going from hand-drawn, beautiful art, if I do say so myself, to working website.
So, okay, again, maybe you're excited by this, maybe you're horrified by this. A lot of this comes down to what's your relationship with code and design. But ultimately, we don't know what this is going to do in terms of people and the jobs they do. Just like ChatGPT and other AI technologies, we need to know what we're doing when these things give us answers. Its text is often wrong or manipulative. The code might not work. And if we over-rely on these tools, we might lose the levels of expertise that we've acquired to help us see its mistakes. So will GPT-4 take away the jobs of coders, or will it simply make coding easier and possibly more productive? Will DALL-E 2 or someday DALL-E 3 take jobs away from artists? Like I said, we don't really know, but we can speculate and we can think about where things are headed, and we can ask questions and advocate for things going a certain way. Art is a challenging case to compare directly to automation because so much of what makes an artist is their own expression. It's done for themselves, and training an AI to specifically take that work is pretty dubious. Take the case of illustrator Holly Mengert, who is a professional illustrator who has worked with Disney and has made her own line of illustrations. In 2022, a Reddit user took just 32 illustrations from Holly's website and built a model that could transfer any image into Holly Mengert's style. We have talked before about the factor of scale in things like Leon 5B, where billions of images and hundreds of thousands of artworks are swept into a data set regardless of copyright or consent. And we've seen that this information gets into the pictures we generate, sometimes directly, sometimes not. But one of the more egregious cases is when people use these backbones of open source image diffusion models, or GANs, and train them specifically to imitate someone else's style without any permission. And that's exactly what happened to Holly Mengert. So she writes that as far as the characters, I didn't see myself in it. I didn't personally see the AI making decisions that I would make, so I did feel distance from the results. Some of that frustrated me because it feels like it isn't particularly mimicking my style, and yet my name is still part of the tool. She wondered if the model's creator simply didn't think of her as a person. I kind of feel like when they created the tool, they were thinking of me as more of a brand or something, rather than a person who worked on their art and tried to hone things, and that certain things that I illustrate are a reflection of my life and experiences that I've had. Because I don't think if a person was thinking about it that way, they would have done it. I think it's much easier to just convince yourself that you're training it to be like an art style, but there's like a person behind that art style. So this is interesting. This is an artist who literally has been targeted specifically as an artist to be replaced by a machine, to create a tool that anyone could use to make things in their style. And they get no benefit from this. And they're saying, well, you know what actually hurt was that it's not me. It's taking my name, it's using my name, and it is creating things that look vaguely like my style, but actually they're not. I am missing from this. This thing has been taken away from me, and it has been using my name, but when I look at it, I don't actually see my artwork. I see my name being used. And I think this is really fascinating. And of course, it's not the only position that an artist would have, right? Artists are many types of people, many different perspectives on this. But here's an artist who's literally saying, I'm a person, right? This AI is a human, and that human is me. And when I look at what the machine builds, it's actually like kind of a joke. It's really dissatisfying, and it feels like something's been taken away from me and is making stuff in my name that I would never make. And that was the part that frustrated her. She goes on to say in the article, and you can read the article, it is cited here, obviously she's not happy about this for other reasons, right? She would not have said yes to this, she says in another portion of the interview, even if, you know, it looked exactly like her work, and that's not the point. The point is, when we build models, when we build these systems, and we think about style, or we think about art as just a set of traits or attributes in an image, we're really doing a disservice to the person who's making these things. And I just think it's really important to think about this phrase, Sarah T. Roberts' phrase, your AI is a human. And this is still true in data sets designed for artworks. So what can people do about this? Well, we've talked before about Have I Been Trained, a website that lets anyone look and see if their artwork is part of the data set that's used to train diffusion models, particularly with Leon 5B. This tool comes from Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst's Spawning project, and it also allows artists to opt their work out of that training data. So you can go to this website, you can say, I'm an artist, this is my URL, I don't want to be included in the scrape of the web that is used to train the next iteration of Stable Diffusion. And the company that runs Stable Diffusion has agreed that it will not use artists who opt out using this website, this mechanism. So that's great, but as we've seen with open source models, people can create all kinds of malicious tools that ignore these requests. They can go and they can find an artist and they can ignore you saying you've opted out, and they can build a model that is trained specifically on your illustrations, and they can release it to the world. So what else can artists do? Well, a tool called Glaze has been created for artists who want to share their work online but are worried about these types of incidents. The authors of the paper and the tool describe these as style mimicry attacks, in which a bad actor uses an AI art model to create art in a particular artist's style without their consent. So this is what's called a style mimicry attack. More than 67% of art pieces showcased on a popular AI art sharing website leverage style mimicry. Now, this is an academic paper, but a lot of what they're describing here is the use of an artist's name in creating artwork by using that artist's name in the prompt. They're calling that a style mimicry attack, because you are using this artist's work to create works in that artist's style that either detract potentially the value of that artist's artwork, or replace it outright. And so they are saying basically artists need to be protected from that kind of attack. Now, one of the things that we can do as people using these tools is not use artists' names. If an artist is alive and selling work, we might say, we're just going to say no to using that person's style, right? You want to create science fiction, you don't have to go and create a science fiction illustration using a specific artist style, but you could go in and say, well, I want to create just a science fiction illustration and see what you get, which would guarantee that you're blending multiple artist styles. which some artists would still say is not appropriate. But the line moves depending on where you put it. I do think that as artists, using an individual artist name and creating artist work in that particular artist style and then putting it online with that artist name certainly has negative consequences for those artists. There's certainly no way around that. If you Google someone's name, as we talked about with Greg Rutkowski, if you Google his name and what comes back are thousands of AI-generated artworks, that artist gets lost. Sort of what this other artist was talking about. These are not his artworks. These are not her artworks. They are AI-generated images of their style. And if they are erased as a result of so many of these images being put out there with their names attached to them, that's obviously harmful to that artist. At the very least, it takes agency and control away from that artist in the sense of the types of work that they want to put out there under their name. So, what is Glaze? Glaze is a tool created by researchers for artists to inject human imperceptible noise into their photographs or illustrations, any image that they upload online, that would make it impossible for the machine to learn from it. They write, the cloaks make calculated changes to pixels within the images. The changes vary for each image, and while they are not necessarily noticeable to the human eye, they significantly distort the image for an AI model during the training process. In other words, humans don't see it in the picture, but the AI does. A screenshot of any of these images would retain the underlying alterations, and the AI model would still be unable to recognize the artist's style in the same way that humans do. So this tool is really interesting. And here's basically how the tool works, more or less. First off, remember that these image learning systems don't see pictures. They see clusters of pixels with image information in them. They see lines of information about the pixels that are in the image, and they figure out a sequence, right? They are not seeing pictures. They are seeing a sequence of data, numbers, numerical values for the colors in pixels and their adjacencies. That's what the algorithm picks out. They understand the properties of individual and clustered pixels, how they fit together, and what they represent when those pixels are sort of connected to a caption. So hopefully you remember all of this from our previous lectures. Glaze uses this technology to analyze the artwork and see exactly what a machine learning system would read in that image as it relates to elements of style. So whatever a diffusion system would pick out of an image, they look at first, and then they apply minor disruptions to those pixels in ways that no human would perceive, because there's millions of pixels in an image. And you could think of it as superimposing another image's style into the sort of nooks and crannies of those pixels, into the existing image, where the pixels matter most on a very granular level. And in the paper, Glaze describes using Van Gogh. So the artwork of Vincent van Gogh is used as a cloak. So the picture might be the same. I might go out and take a picture of my dog, but it would still recognize a picture of dog, but it wouldn't recognize the photo. Let's say I painted a picture of my dog in a very particular style. I use this tool, run my image through this tool before I upload it. When the image sort of machine learning image recognition system encounters that, it doesn't see my style anymore. It sees a dog, but it sees the style of Vincent van Gogh because these pixels have been altered and the pixel information has been altered so that when it reads it, the algorithm picks up on Van Gogh's stylings instead of my own. As a result, when this image is broken down into noise, the clusters of pixels related to style are those that resemble Van Gogh and not my original artwork. So your piece of illustration or photography becomes illegible to the system on a style level. It sees the content, dog, but all of the style elements it doesn't see as you or me, it sees as Vincent van Gogh. This is a technological solution, and it's already been pointed out there are some technological vulnerabilities. So they've already identified, it hasn't been made public, but someone has gone public or they have gone public and said, I figured out how to circumvent this, but they haven't told us how. And they've sent this information to the Glaze designers. But so far, someone has already figured out a vulnerability. And luckily, they were kind of acting ethically, and they sent that vulnerability to the team. So maybe that particular vulnerability will be cut out. But technology is an arms race. It's inevitable that as a technology is introduced, someone introduces a technology that undoes that protection. And then a new protection comes out, and then someone introduces a new technology to undo that protection, and so on and so on and so on. So we can assume that bad actors will at some point be able to undo this cloaking. But the cloaking itself is interesting from a legal perspective too, because it represents something pretty important. A big defense of taking copyrighted illustrations or photographic work being done by these models is that they're unsupervised, that this model goes out and just gulps down this data from the web. And if a company inserts code that would say, oh, fix these images, right? Unmask these cloaked images, that company is basically saying, oh yeah, we actually can control what happens when the algorithm encounters an image. And so it's basically an admission that they are willing to take data from artists who clearly don't want that data being taken. And this poses that interesting question. It just may be speculative, but if we can embed these masks into images, isn't that clear enough an assertion that that artist doesn't want to be part of a training data set? And if a company creates a tool that actually says, oh, never mind that, undo that if an artist does that, aren't they very clearly ignoring the intent of that artist? Aren't they essentially designing a tool that says, we don't care about your assertion of copyright? This is arguable. This has not been tested, not been proven, but it's something to consider. And all of this comes down to questions about copyright. Some say that an artist actually has no legal rights to their images being taken into these data sets. That the machines learn these images in the same way that a person might learn them when looking at an image in a gallery or looking at it online, and that this is not a protected use or derivation of the original image. They basically argue that as long as the images aren't directly stealing an actual piece that the artist made, copyright doesn't matter. You can't copyright a style. You can't copyright specific content. If I go and photograph trees, I can't stop you from photographing trees. If I go and paint a tree blue and then photograph it, I can't stop other people from going and painting trees blue. But if you take my exact photo of blue trees and share it, of course, that's mine. That's where copyright comes in. So what rights do you have under copyright for images created with an AI? The answer is not very many. Right now, the US Copyright Office does not believe that you are the author of an AI image, and it does not believe that the AI is protected as the author either. So, for the last part of this class, let's dig into this when AI is not a human. So the Copyright Office issued some guidance, early guidance on AI artwork, and it says this: in the office's view, it is well established that copyright can protect only material that is the product of human creativity. Most fundamentally, the term author, which is used in both the Constitution and the Copyright Act, excludes non-humans. So you cannot have a non-human author receive copyright. This is written into the Constitution of the United States as well as the Copyright Act. And in this first round of advice about copyright, the Copyright Office doesn't suggest anything particularly concrete about AI-generated artworks and whether the work you make with an AI can be protected. But it does suggest some interesting case studies that suggest ways in which it might be possible, and ways in which it isn't. So one of the interesting case studies that it touches on is from 1884. And this centers on the question of whether a camera was the author of a photograph. This would make all photographs ineligible for copyright. And this was the argument. Someone photographed a photograph and said, basically, you know what? People can point a camera at anything. They don't have to do any particular thing to make this photograph. They just push a button and they get a picture. The office notes that the case was settled by the office back then, finding that photographs are the work of an author, not the machine, even though one can simply point a camera at anything and make an image. That was actually key. The fact that one has limitless potential for what to photograph suggests that human agency is involved in choosing what they do photograph. So if you could go out and photograph literally anything, that means that you have made a choice about what to photograph. So this was used to say, well, there are possibilities, right? This is one possibility of a machine being deemed the results of a human making that image. And that had to do with the agency of the human in choosing what the result was and crafting that result. So let's look at another one. This is a case from 2018, pretty recent compared to 1884. And in this one, a photographer, wildlife photographer, went out, left a camera on the ground, came back, and a monkey had been playing with the camera. And the monkey photographed itself while it was doing that. And here you see the actual image. This is not AI generated. It's hard to tell these days. This is an actual macaque monkey, and this is the picture that it took using his camera. The photographer published this photo and was sued by an animal rights group, which argued that the monkey took the photo, and therefore the monkey was the copyright holder of the photograph. And in this case, copyright would have been extended to a non-human if this were the case. Now, there's some challenges here. First of all, we already know that non-humans cannot get a copyright. The question was not whether the monkey should have the copyright. The question was whether the photographer had the copyright. Now, this case was never decided. A judge never weighed in one way or the other. Instead, it was dismissed because the animal rights group had no legal authority to represent the monkey. Basically, the monkey couldn't sign any forms handing its legal representation over to the group, so there was no legal grounds for the organization to sue anybody on the monkey's behalf. Basically, the monkey never gave anyone permission to sue anybody. So this is an interesting case. Because it does talk about this non-human, it's an unsettled case, but it also points to the fact that I would never be able to sue anyone on behalf of an AI-generated artwork unless an AI gave me the right to represent it legally. And this opens up some interesting questions as well. Do the companies that make these models have that legal right? Could OpenAI or Stable Diffusion, the companies that make these tools, sue someone for selling an AI artwork, an AI-generated artwork using their tool set? This is a hypothetical. There's no evidence that says that they are interested in that, but could they? Are they even allowed to represent the AI model? So that's an interesting question. The second is, if there is no copyright for humans using these tools to make these images, but the AI does not have the right to enforce its own copyright, then what is the status of these images? And is there a line where you become the author? Well, the office basically concludes that to qualify as a work of authorship, a work must be created by a human being, and that it will not register works produced by a machine or mere mechanical process that operates randomly or automatically without any creative input or intervention from a human author. It says specifically that prompts are not enough. Writing a prompt is not enough because it is then generating more or less random expressions that are unconnected to the prompt. You're giving it guidance, but you're not telling it what to create. Now, arguably, this is inaccurate. Arguably, you could go in and create a very specific set of instructions for this tool, and you could get a result back that shows that specific set of instructions. The point is that you are typing and it is giving you an image, and so you do not have direct control over the content or form that that image takes, and therefore it is not your work. As of right now, as of this advice from the Copyright Office. You can read this as saying AI is not a creative tool as far as the Copyright Office is concerned, but it's not really saying that. It does go on to say that sometimes, on a case-by-case basis, these works might involve greater degrees of human authorship over others. And it offers up some of the questions that the office might ask when they look at AI-generated art that comes in to be considered for copyright. So what they're looking at is basically whether the work is basically one of human authorship, with a computer or other device merely being an assisting instrument, which would be human authored, or whether the traditional elements of authorship in the work, literary, artistic, or musical expression, or elements of selection and arrangement, were actually conceived and executed not by man, but by a machine. Did a person conceive and execute the selection and the arrangement of the elements in this literary, artistic, or musical work? If a person can be said to have done that, it is eligible for copyright to that person. If a machine is said to be doing that arrangement of things, then no copyright can be given. The second question that they will be looking at is, in the case of works containing AI-generated material, they will consider whether the AI contributions are the result of mechanical reproduction or the author's own original mental conception to which the author gave visible form. So these are a bit vague, but ultimately they point at an openness to consider that some AI-generated imagery may be eligible for copyright, may be eligible for protection to the people making work with these tools. And one example that is one of the earliest examples is a comic book. Art was created by a AI image generation tool, but the text was created by the author, and this artwork basically just gave the story a visual form. The comic book received a copyright, and then the Copyright Office found out that the images in it were generated by an AI machine, and so they rescinded that copyright. But they later suggested that the text itself, the comic book, that form containing those images could be protected, but the images themselves could not be. Which means that you could go in and you could take any of those images from that book and put them in your own stuff, but you couldn't take that comic book and sell it as your own. That comic book was protected as an assemblage, but the individual elements of the photos or the pictures or illustrations used in that comic book were not protected. So we've just looked at two ways in which your AI is a human. First, there are cases when what's called an AI is literally a person, just a person far away from you and hidden from the interfaces that you use. That includes things like content moderation. It includes things like startups that simply haven't figured out what their machine learning technology looks like yet. And things like Mechanical Turk, where you can process your requests to do these tasks that we often think are being done by machines, and they do go on to inform what machines can do. We also looked at cases where the machines are or did replace humans in the history of automation, and this claim that automation leads to new jobs, which we've seen is not a universal truth. It's not a one-size-fits-all type of equation. That way of thinking that automation creates new jobs has really not been true since the late 1980s. And we looked at the automation of art and art making, that there are artists in the data set, and many tools that are around right now are looking at how to protect the artists that are in that data set, including tools like Glaze and Have I Been Trained, that are there to help protect artists from having their work used in these data sets. And we talked about the first wave of copyright protection advice from the US Copyright Office, which make it clear that AI is not a human and has no rights to its output, but neither does anyone else, at least not yet. And there's another element of your AI being human that might be worth mentioning that I noted at the top of this talk, which is a question of AI and sentience. Is your AI a sentient being? It's my hope that seeing how these systems work and understanding the fully mechanized processes and code behind them, that they break down images and draw images according to information and data and algorithms, makes it clear that these tools aren't creative agents in and of themselves. They don't really make art the way people make art. They're not operating out of any sense of experience or personal reflection. But that doesn't mean that artists can't make compelling things with them. And it doesn't remove the remarkable leaps forward that these tools represent for visual storytelling and human creativity. But they require humans to make all of these things. And in my opinion, we shouldn't be so eager to take the human out of the AI. In that sense, the AI is human in that we are the ones who can do creative things with it. And on that note, I hope you are inspired to go make something. So I encourage you to go play, and I will see you next week. Thanks so much.